Hey guys, Will, it's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new, welcome and thank you for finding us. Let's jump right into this video. It's The Island, hell yes. So this film is being released by Eureka Entertainment on the 13th of October, 2025. Here's something that's really interesting about this. This movie was in theaters October 11th until the 18th, so it played for a week, 1985. So as I am recording this, which is October the 13th. So this is the release day. Hey, what the heck? I'm so on time right now. I'm like a Japanese train. As I'm recording this, and as you are watching this, this is 40th anniversary to the week that this film was in theaters. So this film was in theaters on this day 40 years ago. That's pretty fucking cool. I've recorded videos about movies on anniversary years and sometimes even on anniversary months, but I don't think I've ever before done a video on the same week that a movie was in theaters and had just been released in Hong Kong. So that's pretty exciting to me. So this film was directed by Po Chi Lung, who directed Hong Kong 1941, which was released by Eureka Entertainment relatively recently, with Chow Yun-fat is in and Alex Mann. It's a pretty famous movie. Shanghai 1920, Fatal Love. So that's a movie with Leslie Chung and Sherry Chung, which I believe I have the Hong Kong Blu-ray release of that film, and it's just in my pile of movies to watch. Never seen it before, but I'm excited to check that one out. Something that's really interesting about this, so this is a D&B Films release. So if you don't know, D&B Films was, the D is for Dixon Poon, who was like I guess a millionaire or a billionaire, like this really rich guy who did, he had like owned a jewelry company or something like that, or jewelry stores. And he was at some point married to Michelle Yeoh. He's the D in that company, and the B is Sammo Hung, because that's his actual name, not his name that he was, his Western name that's on the Sammo, you know, that we know. So that company, more often than not, from what I have seen, they attribute the screenplays for the movies to the D&B creative team, which I find really, really interesting, because from what I gather about that kind of just means that, like, you know, their producers, the director of this film, probably some writers who are on staff or whatever, are just like spitballing ideas and coming up with scenes and kind of putting everything together. And then probably what they do is they just go and they start filming it, and they have this list of scenes, and they're kind of like, you know, improvising and figuring things out as they're on locations. That is a really cool approach. And it's a very interesting credit to give to an entire creative team rather than to an individual person. I really liked the music in this movie. The music is by Law Dick, who also did Royal Warriors. And then the director of photography on this film, the cinematographer, is Poon Hong Sung, or Poon Hong Sang, Hong Sung, who did Peking Opera Blues, Once a Thief, Armor of God, Chinese Ghost Story, The Heroic Trio, Kung Fu Hustle, Crime Story, Ip Man 2. So quite a resume with that guy. Let me give you a little bit about what this movie is about. I'll show off the release to you. I'll tell you what the bonus material is, and then I will be out of your hair after I give you some of my thoughts, as I always do in these videos. I really like the artwork here. It's by Elin Sheedy, who has done stuff for the Shawscope sets, the Arrow sets. So there's that. And there's the back. And then if we pop this bad boy out of the slipcase, I also have to say I really like this, which we find on the inside. I think this is super cool. And this is the Masters of Cinema line here, too, by the way. So this is John Shum, if you don't recognize, you know, who's in, like, Wheels on Meals, I think, right? And, like, he's like, I mostly know him from comedies, and I think he's, like, very, very funny, and I really like him in comedies. And he's in the Lucky Stars series, too. And he's like a very funny dude, but then he also did a lot of stuff behind the scenes. You can find some really interesting interviews with him talking about his work as like a producer and stuff like that. Here's what you get on the inside. So there's the disc, here's the booklet. And then if you pop the disc out here, this is not a spoiler because this is from the opening credit sequence, but here's John Shum looking at some fish in an aquarium. And then we have, look at it, you didn't get a lot of glare here. So this film is like, it's kind of a slasher movie, and I'll talk more about what I mean about that. Oh, here's the, if you're interested in like the cast and everything. There you go. So this is a piece entitled To Genre and Back, The Cinema of Po Chi Long. Oh, it's long. It's fine. So what I do typically when I take my notes is I go online and I'll read like Hong Kong Movie Database and various other sources, and I'll write down the names of the people involved in the film and stuff like that. And then when I open the material while I'm recording, the names are spelled differently and the pronunciation is clearly different, and I feel like an idiot. All within the same genre, an interview with Po Chi Long. So there you go. And that's by Roger Garcia. Oh, and the first one is by Roger Garcia as well. And then, there's an interview in here with the director, so that's what that is. And then here's Hong Kong 1941. So a little picture from that right there. And then here we have the credits and the viewing notes and stuff of that nature. So this film is about John Shum plays a professor, he's a geography professor. And he takes a group of students, I think there's 6 of the students plus him, so 7 people altogether. They're going on like this little vacation, basically, like a weekend getaway to go camping. And he jokes that it's because they're, he has to hang out with them socially because they're so bad at class that like they never pass their exams at like the camps. And so there's like this, they have this like silly sense of camaraderie. And the idea is just to go and like drink some beers and hang out on the beach and go swimming and just like have a little getaway on this island that's, out in the waters by Hong Kong, or it's part of Hong Kong. It's one of the islands that is part of Hong Kong. And when they get there, they find out that there's this family of 3 brothers, and their mom has just recently passed away. And they all have very different personalities. The oldest brother is like really intense and like threatening and doesn't talk a lot. The middle brother is kind of the one who has the best social ability, but is also kind of creepy. And then the youngest brother has like an unspecified mental problem and is kind of like he seems like he's this kind of innocent, harmless person, but then he's also kind of like a violent lunatic in certain situations. And so they get brought there by a boat, and the boat is not returning for 2 days, and so they are trapped on this island with these guys. So what you'll read about this film it's written on the back here, and it's also spoken about extensively on the bonus features here, and it's unavoidable to say these things because it's very clear that this film is drawing from American films of the 1970s that were looking at, and obviously like the Vietnam and post-Vietnam era, right? So this is very rooted in like social and political and historical things. That's looking at the divide between rural America and urban America, how that relates to class divides, how that relates to kind of just different ways of life, and also how it relates to people's political opinions and attitudes about violence and stuff like that, right? Deliverance, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Hills Have Eyes. I've never seen Last House on the Left. Tony Raines, who has a little kind of talking head piece on here that's I think about 16 or 17 minutes long, he mentions Last House on the Left as another film that you can see they're drawing inspiration for this film. I expected this movie to be more of a slasher film, which is not to say that it's not a slasher film. And I know that sounds confusing, but let me explain this. I expected it to be more of like a violent, brutal Texas Chainsaw Massacre type of movie where these people are like hunting down and killing these people. And like one by one, they're trying to survive and escape. And it's more of like a chase and murder film. This film is much more of a suspense piece, And that's a really interesting trick it has up its sleeve because it sets you up to expect a film more like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or like one of the Friday the 13th movies, or like kind of a classic slasher type of film. The killing, like the brutality in this movie, so there are violent pieces of this film. And there are creepy pieces of this film. But the full-blown, like, killing, fighting, violence, blood doesn't start until like an hour or even like an hour 10 into the film. There's so much buildup, and they're creating so much tension that what this movie really is more so than a slaughterfest or like a gore film is a piece of dread that's trying to basically create as much tension within you, the viewer, as possible before it gives into the inevitability of there being a violent conflict that blows up and there's like dead bodies everywhere, right? Which does eventually happen in the third act of the film. It does a really incredible job of building almost like unbearable suspense at times. I have a very interesting relationship with horror films in that I really love a lot of horror films, but there are certain types of horror films I cannot watch or that are really difficult for me to watch is maybe a better way to put it. I love like the Evil Dead movies, for example. I'm a huge fan of the Friday the 13th franchise. I love the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I love the Halloween movies. Like I love movies like From Beyond and Reanimator, and I really love zombie movies and stuff like that. I love the Scream franchise. So there's a lot of horror movies that I really love, that I watch a lot over and over. I've seen only 3 Hellraiser movies, but I really liked all the Hellraiser movies I've seen. And so gore in and of itself is not a problem for me. And sometimes I really like the Evil Dead movies, and I really like the way that they very effectively utilize their extreme violence and gore. This movie is nowhere near that level in terms of the gore and the physical violence that you see on screen. This movie has a sense of maliciousness and dread and nastiness that I found to be more uncomfortable than like the gore of a movie like Evil Dead, right? A movie that I actually didn't even finish was Untold Story. Untold Story is really not that brutal of a film. And again, I didn't finish it. I know what happens at the end. So I know it gets really brutal at the end, okay? It's if you compare Untold Story to, for instance, 2013 Evil Dead. The amount of blood that is in 2013 Evil Dead, like you can't even put them on the same, like they're not in the same conversation, right? It's not a brutally gory film in terms of just nonstop violence and blood, right? But it's a film that has a maliciousness to it that I found really uncomfortable, and I actually stopped watching it, like I said, because I knew what was coming at the end, and because I have kids, and I was like, I can't deal with this right now. This movie is not that level of malicious and nastiness. This movie was just the right level to me, that it made me a little bit uncomfortable, but not so much so that I was like, I can't watch this movie right now, right? So it worked for me. It does have, there's a bit of nastiness in it. There's a sexual assault. You don't actually see it. It's shot in such a way that you don't physically kind of see what's going on, but you know that it's happening, and it's just gross and uncomfortable and nasty. And you know that these people are like disgusting, violent, brutal, remorseless, nasty people, right? It's a very interesting psychological film. And I think that's maybe the best way to put it. This is a movie that its horror is a psychological game that it is playing with you as the audience, more so than an endurance test of brutality. This movie has some really interesting tricks up its sleeve that I found to be really intelligent filmmaking. The first is that the movie opens, and if you don't want to know anything about the plot other than what I've already told you, then there might be tiny, tiny spoilers in here. The movie opens with a scene in which a woman who is from mainland China, who's trying to swim to Hong Kong and kind of like sneak into like, the city, like the main urban part of Hong Kong. She's been captured by these guys. And they're holding her on the island, and they're trying to marry her to the youngest brother, which is the wish of the mom, is that the younger brother get married, right? And that desire kind of drives a lot of what these guys are doing in this movie. By showing this opening scene, because this woman is because she's from mainland China and she's trying to escape that and come to Hong Kong, she is easily the most likable person in this film. Because she hasn't done anything wrong, and she's not trying to offend anybody. She just wants a better life for herself. There is a dynamic with the characters who come from urban Hong Kong to this island where they're kind of condescending towards these backwoods guys. They kind of like think that they're a little bit stupid and slow, and that their ways are kind of archaic, and that they make fun of them. And they don't just make fun of them behind their backs. There's a point where it escalates to them making fun of them to their faces. And you see this kind of moment where you're like, maybe they would not have tried to mess with you guys if you hadn't been such dicks to them, to their faces, right? So again, it's like this movie is playing psychological games where it's like these people are the victims. They don't really do anything wrong, but they're kind of assholes, right? And that John Shum, as a geography professor, his sense of geography is terrible. And these like guys with no education have a tremendous sense of space, geography, like You know, like, it's this really interesting interplay between how do we define intelligence, how do we define sophistication, people's insecurities, and how, as you have this increasing divide in an increasingly globalist, capitalist, consumer-driven big city environment between a more traditional way of life and how people are living in the cities, right? And that's brought up here, interestingly, through some dialogue we hear on the radio at the beginning about the government and real estate companies. And the real estate companies are trying to develop these underdeveloped areas, and there's people who are living there, and they're getting pushed out so that they can be turned into, like, apartments, condos, houses, and stuff like that. So this movie is thematically trying to dig into this really interesting dynamic at this pivotal historical moment as the global capitalist culture in the 1980s is exploding and being driven by stocks and consumerism and stuff like that, right? And material wealth. And it's pushing further away from more traditional ways of life and how that tension manifests. And again, very much like what a movie like Deliverance is about, right? And so you can really easily see that influence there, but it's putting it into more of a Hong Kong context. What I find to be really smart about what this movie does, so to return to what I was talking about with the opening scene of this immigrant, right? Even though these guys on this island are, they're being made fun of by these rich people and stuff like that, right? Without this section in the beginning, I think there would be more ambiguity about whether or not they are monstrous people. It should be like, well, these people are like making fun of them. They're being horrible to them. Like, it gets to the point where they just kind of snap and they fight back, right? But we know that they're really bad people because we see what they do to this helpless woman in the beginning, right? That does two things. It helps us not sympathize with them, which makes us see them as the bad guys, which then it's trying to align us with these victims, but who are not particularly good people, right? So there's like this moral ambiguity there that's really interesting. It also creates this tremendous sense of dread, because if we had not seen them victimizing this woman at the beginning, when we first meet them, we're not like, oh, shit, it's these guys. We're just like, oh, okay, there's these dudes who live on this island, whatever, right? So it's playing this game of dread and suspense immediately. And it's setting you up from the very first moment to be dreading everything that is to come. And I think the way that it creates this kind of vortex of obviously killing people, kidnapping people, trying to force people in marriage, all of these things are wrong, right? But you do see this sense of constant humiliation and abject poverty that they are facing from the world that these people represent. And so how much of that are people expected to take before they do something about it, right? As it's a very interesting dynamic, and I think it's a movie that's very well done and much more intelligent than you might think if you're just kind of throwing it on being like, oh, here's like a slasher type of film. There are 2 commentary tracks on here, one from Frank Jeng and one from Mike Leader and Arna Venema. I highly encourage you to watch both of those. There were some cultural specificities that I certainly would have missed were it not for Frank's commentary. And I always love to hear Arna talk about horror films in particular, because he's a huge fan of horror films, but he's also a filmmaker. And so he has really interesting insight into like what they're doing in terms of the technique. I know much more about and can talk much more at length about story, character, structure, like the way those things are put together. The aspects of like lenses, lighting, like the editing, all that stuff. It's something I know less about. And so I always find that really interesting, that level of insight. Like I said, Tony Raines is on here, and he does kind of like just a discussion of the film, I guess. It's an intro. I don't know exactly what you would call it, but it's about 17 minutes. And then there's Surviving the Shoot, interview with director Po Chi Long from 2023, so pretty recent, courtesy of Frederic Ambroisin, who if you watch this channel at all, or if you buy these releases, you undoubtedly know who that is, because his archive of interviews is just like mind-boggling how many of them are and the quality of people that they're with. And then there's the limited edition collector's booklet with the interview in it and the slipcase. And there you go. So that's The Island. My name is Will. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. It was an interesting film. I'm not sure that I've ever seen... I know there are other movies like this from Hong Kong, because I've heard about them and people have recommended them to me and stuff like that, but I'm not sure that I've seen a lot of them. So it's, for me personally, it did remind me of, I do have to say, it reminded me of We're Going to Eat You, the Troy Hark movie, which I reviewed last year for Halloween. That movie was a lot funnier and more self-aware and had a lot more meta devices going on with like the way it was playing with genre and stuff. I loved that movie. This is much more of like a serious kind of straight ahead suspense piece, but there's like some similarities there. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.